Avalokiteshvara recalling his qualities, forever joyful at the happiness of others, and plunged into sorrow whenever they suffer. You have fully realized great compassion with all its qualities, and abide without a care for your own happiness or suffering. So not to be hurt by the obstacles created by enemies, illness, or harmful influences does not mean to say that things like sickness can be driven away and that they will never occur again. Rather, it simply means that they will not be able to obstruct us from practicing on the path. In order for this to happen, we need first to get rid of the attitude of being entirely unwilling to face suffering ourselves, and second, to cultivate the attitude of actually being joyful when suffering arises. Dropping the attitude of being entirely unwilling to suffer. Think about all the depression, anxiety, and irritation we put ourselves through by always seeing suffering as unfavorable, something to be avoided at all costs. Now think about two things: how useless this is, and how much trouble it causes. Go on reflecting on this repeatedly until you are absolutely convinced. Then say to yourself, from now on, whatever I have to suffer, I will never become anxious or irritated. Go over this again and again in your mind and summon all your courage and determination. First, let's look at how useless it is. If we can do something to solve a problem, then there is no need to worry or be unhappy about it. If we can't, then it doesn't help to worry or be unhappy about it either. Then the enormous trouble involved. As long as we don't get anxious and irritated, then our strength of mind will enable us to bear even the hardest of sufferings easily. They'll feel as flimsy and insubstantial as cotton wool. But while we are dominated by anxiety, even the tiniest problem becomes extremely difficult to cope with, because we have the additional burden of mental discomfort and happiness. Imagine, for example, trying to get rid of desire and attachment for someone we find attractive while continuing to dwell all the while on their attractive qualities. It would all be in vain. In just the same way, if we concentrate only on the pain brought by suffering, we'll never be able to develop endurance or the ability to bear it. So, as in the instructions called Sealing the Doors of the Senses, don't latch onto all kinds of mind-made concepts about your suffering. Learn instead to leave the mind undisturbed in its own natural state. Bring the mind home. Rest there, and let it find its own ground. Drupchen Jigme Tempanima, Transforming Suffering and Happiness. And there's a link to that in the show notes. We read a section. We will read the next section on using happiness next time. This is Darren Littlejohn. Welcome to the 12-Step Buddhist Podcast, episode 75, How to Give the Gift of Being, and continuing with the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva, number 32. If compelled by your own afflictions, you speak of the faults of other bodhisattvas, you yourself will degenerate. Therefore, never to mention the faults of those who have entered the mahayana path is the practice of a bodhisattva. Well, all eyes on me. Within myself, my third eye, my meditation eye, needs to be focused within, and this is wisdom that we've known forever. Gotta look at yourself. When there's finger pointing at you, there's 3 pointing back at me. This is all common AA reference language, which gives us these guideposts that tell us the truth is not out there. The externalization and so forth is indeed only to be dealt with within ourselves on the spiritual path. And if we think about it just from a common sense point of view, there's no way to solve a problem in my backyard if I'm in your backyard. It just doesn't make any sense. Well, we have to understand that the problem is ours, and we should kind of get to this point by now in the path, if you're just brand new to recovery and that sort of thing. This really is the first thing that we do. We realize that we're blowing it. But really the idea in this principle, this is a Mahayana vow kind of principle, but really essentially what does it mean to us and how can we apply it into our paths of recovery? There's no way that I can see the truth of my real Buddha nature, of the already self-perfected realized state, spoken of in the higher teachings, if my focus is out there? How can I work on my own spiritual development if my focus is out there? If I'm continually blaming and I'm caught in the endless loop of the locus of control, as we say in psychology, being external, then we have no power. We really have an excuse not to be able to do anything, to render ourselves incapable, however we want to reinforce that. And we can honor those parts of ourselves with our IFS thinking and so forth. If you've been following along, we had a little bit of talk on that. If we're on the Mahayana path, it means we've taken the vow. Taken the vow many times in different empowerments, initiations with the Dalai Lama more than once and so forth. So take the vow means something. The vow means I am making a commitment. And in this dharmic path, the vow really isn't something that you take back. You can really tell people who have the ego and they think that they're in their own sort of state of being a teacher or being someone who pontificates to others or who is a guide or a coach or a lead. And in effect, it's really all marketing. I'm not saying nothing's helpful. In reality, the work that we need to do is laid out in thousands of years of technical meditation manuals by people who we could never be, because we don't have the time, the place, the culture, the support. We don't have hundreds and thousands of years to sit and meditate on the mind because there was no internet. There was no technology. The technology was there's the dirt, there's the sun, there's the wind, up in the Himalayas, it's windy. We don't really need to invent something. And I'm just kind of annoyed with everybody who wants to be the super, I've got the non-dual solution. It's just a lot of non-dual bullshit that a lot of people have, because if you understand something and you've studied these tenets and these teachings and these principles and these different sophisticated systems and different lineages and comparisons and analysis of different texts and years of processing it and working with the practices, it's just really silly. I can't make you understand that, how silly that is. I see people come across my Facebook, this is a genius work of non-dual wisdom for us all. I don't like diluted Western bullshit where people are trying to kind of, I use a little Zen and I use a little this and I use a little that, or other people I've known, shamans who I've done really deep spiritual work with, that still I'm like, who's your teacher? They won't even answer me. They don't have a teacher. It's from themselves. Okay, I get it, but I'm in a system of Buddhism which teaches all the stages and all the different paths and all the different ways of going about this into the depths of psychology that we really aren't there. We're getting there in terms of our knowledge scientifically and brain data and how things work and so forth. But in terms of the sophistication required and the set of tools, say, on the Mahayana path, required to transcend and transform suffering into happiness and become totally liberated Buddha. So I get a Sangha, I take a commitment, I have a vow, I hang out with other people, I talk in the Mahayana path. I can't talk smack about those people, because if I start to do that, then the sacredness of my vow degenerates. This is a deeper, esoteric, energetic kind of Buddhist thing that's underlying. The vibration underlying this is that you understand karma, you understand impermanence, the nature of suffering, the eight worldly concerns, the unavoidability of anything that we do that leads us back to. We still suffer. We haven't found the solution to end suffering. Well, the Dharma is the path to end suffering. And it's spelled out like that, and it's step by step in a lot of different ways for a lot of different capacities of being. And it's not to say that things can't assist and help us and we work in a comprehensive, multifaceted recovery way. I just don't want you to think that you're downloading some real heavy truth and wisdom. Even if it's nice and even if it's accessible, I want you to know that these real sacred teachings exist and we're able to practice them. Even if you're stuck in the Midwest somewhere and it's freezing cold and you got no Buddhists around you can still practice this stuff. And we're going to do this, right? Never mention the faults of others, but really the whole point of looking within ourselves, and we can do this pratyahara, a yogic practice, more of a Hindu kind of lineage, where we kind of tune out everything and focus only with ourselves, and our senses are dulled to everything outside of ourselves. But, in the Dzogchen team spirit, we're really open to everything. We're really not trying to block it out. So this is a great reason to understand the teaching that we read on transforming suffering. And you can get that up there on the podcast.compassionrecovery.us website on the show notes for this episode. Probably this one is outside the show notes as well, accessible from anywhere. We really do need to understand that there is a benefit to changing our attitude towards suffering. So I'm going to drop this on you It's an old AA thing. Everybody knows it. What you resist persists. So let's think about this. An old AA guy, Dan Crouch, told me, hey, if you're in a theater, and there's a fire, you definitely want the doors to open outward so everybody can get out. But in the mind and in the meditation and in the taking on the seat, which at the time we called the secret place of the tabernacles of the Most High, and when you get into that secret space and secret place in your deepest meditation at the core center of your being, and you can rest and relax so much and so deeply that you can notice a little tiny pebble drop playing into a still pond. To relax into the space of our suffering and not resist it is something that if you have ever suffered from migraines. I've never had surgeries, broken bones, things like that. I mean, I've had some surgeries, but just facial, like a skin cancer thing, nothing, no big deal. I had a vasectomy. That was kind of weird, but it wasn't really like, overwhelming, that kind of a thing. Overwhelmed, you have to relax on such a level. Why do you think they give you morphine? It activates these things in the brain, but it just puts you also in a state of complete non-defensiveness to the suffering. You're not defending it. And when you're not defending it, your system isn't as stressed and your system can focus its energy on healing. So it's great to have all these mindfulness meditations in the McMindfulness, Google industry, of everybody having a Zoom course on such and so forth. But I'm just talking about the real deal here, the real teachings that are going to transcend my suffering. They're going to help me transcend my suffering and be on the path to Buddhahood. I'm not interested in playing this game anymore. This is the commitment of a bodhisattva. I'm not interested in playing this endless loop of samsara, birth, old age, sickness, death, ad infinitum, as we would say in the big book of AA, right? And yes, I'm still the 12-step Buddhist. This is still my orientation and my framework. However, I've taken it and expanded it into a more applicable and deeper explanation and a more comprehensive, well-rounded program, an idea for a program, really, rather, in compassionate recovery. But we really work on these Buddhist principles and with no holds barred here. So first, the idea that I have to change my attitude about suffering. I've got to relax. If I put any effort into fighting it, if I move the slightest molecule in the nerve ending of my synapses in my brain when I'm laying there with a migraine, and my migraines weren't real ones. They were a different version of migraines than a lot of people have. But I know the pain. I know pain. And you know pain, right? And when you have to you just have to be still. Even a thought will cause waves of pain shattering through your brain like shards of ice. What we're trying to do, what we're understanding in the practice, in transforming suffering, which we're going to be talking about more as we go, and the text is up on the website there, but we're coming to the conclusion of the 37 practices of a bodhisattva, and I've just completed another 10-day retreat on this text, on the Mahayana wisdom of the Bodhisattva path and transforming suffering and so forth. So we're working, the topics aren't separate, so it works very nicely to sort of segue as we go, as we close one loop and begin another one, or close one section of teaching and another teaching in the Mahayana spirit and in the spirit of compassion. But really, I'm giving you compassion. This isn't Dear and Little John, so to speak. I mean, I'm framing it for you. But I am not the wisdom keeper here, folks. I mean, say, for example, when I wrote the 12-Step Buddhist, I sat there and ground my brain out on this laptop, in the backyard in Portland. And it was a lot of work, and I cut and pasted, and I didn't know what I was doing. And obviously, that was a process, and it worked out with good editing and so forth. The ability to think through these things and to really process this over a long term, it just gives you the perspective that you kind of know how to avoid the pitfalls, right? So the number one pitfall is to resist suffering. And when we resist suffering, it makes everything worse. And they say it in AA, pain is inevitable, suffering is an option. Well, I disagree with that the way it's stated, but I really want to give it to you the way it is in Dharma, is that if we resist, it persists, and then it cycles and it spirals and it goes on in an exponential way. If you're reading Compassionate Recovery, how our brains work with the dopaminergic system and all these different brain neurotransmitters and systems that work, we dig ourselves a hole deeper into these neurosynaptic ruts and different systems of the brain that fire off alarms and want us to seek, avoid pain and seek pleasure and all this. The part of us that becomes an addict grows and deepens and gets more and more knotted up and wound up into itself, right? Until it's impenetrable. We can loosen the knot if we let go of our resistance. So how do we do that? We can do a practice. And this will be our holy holidays, Christmas spirit, Feliz Navidad, everybody, and all that good stuff. And give the gift of you. You want to give something? Listen, I don't have too many people around me to give stuff to. I don't have the money to give stuff to people. I got animals, try to get some stuff for my animals. But there's something that I can offer and that I can practice offering that on a spiritual level works within myself. You really overcome the hurdle of suffering by ceasing to resist suffering. So this is a deep path. You have to be able to really work with it and do it a little bit at a time, and you're not going to be great at it, and it's going to be a process, and it's going to take however long it takes. But little by little, when we work this way, it's not like we get tougher and can take a hit. It's kind of like it just passes through us. And they say, let it wash over you, water over a duck's back, that kind of thing. But it doesn't pass us. It passes through us. It comes from us and passes through us. And so we're not entangled in the attachment to pleasure and the avoidance of suffering. So let's do the practice. The first part of the practice is to absorb our own suffering. So we're just going to kind of notice it. Let's come into a meditation space. You can pause the podcast for a moment if you need to. Not while you're driving, please. Don't do this while you're driving. But come to a place of stillness. Have a nice deep inhale, as always. Fill it up completely, as always. Open the throat, relax, let it go. Don't push it out. But give it a little push down at the base and let it go. Just a little bit. Pause, float in that empty space. Let's do it again without me talking. The thoughts ride the prana, so when you exhale and pause, you chill in that empty space. But what we're going to imagine here is our own suffering. All right, we're going to understand our own suffering. We're going to imagine that there's a black sphere at the center of our being, and that black sphere is the suffering. Everything that we feel of suffering and torment and anxiety and depression and fear and dread and bad dreams and all stuff is in this black sphere at the center of our core. Like it's right there. It's like, man, the black. But you're just going to feel like your own suffering is being absorbed into your heart space, which is deeper than this black sphere. It's deeper than the suffering. It's deeper than the memories, deeper than brain responses, deeper than mental imprints. There's a knowledge that's so deep. It's the stillness. It's compassionate, active, energetic stillness. So we're not pausing in the empty space and trying to avoid the suffering. We're churning it up and bringing it up, and you may start heaving, you may start crying, and you may start feeling stuff. And it's okay. Put your hand on your heart. Give yourself that self-compassion. This is hard. Take an inhale. Exhale. Yeah, I just acknowledge it and put my hand on my heart, and it changes my oxytocin. Read Compassionate Recovery. It's all in there. It's a lot of stuff from Kirsten Neff's self-compassion studies and so forth, and other people's. This stuff is really good to know how it works, because when you do it, it's a formula that works. It's like, okay, I got a headache, I take an aspirin, boom. All right, well, if it doesn't work, if it's something you can't take an aspirin for, the core of our own suffering is really right in there. So let's just let it absorb. I just want to focus right now on just absorbing your own suffering into your deepest heart center. And as the suffering comes in, it's not resisted, it's not pushed away. You're completely open, like open everything. Just hang open, hang out, hang open. And as you do so, the black sphere begins to get some chinks and some dents and some cracks. And there's some light coming through. And it ain't all the whole core of who you really are. That suffering is not who you really are. Eckhart Tolle would call it the pain body. It's this identification. It's this concept. It's this black sphere. It's getting cleaned up. The more we allow ourselves to just simply absorb suffering, and this is just Hinayana, this is just soul seeker here. This is just individual, you within yourself. Allow yourself to experience the suffering that you experience in the moment that you experience it without resistance. Loosen the knot, let it go, have an inhale. Breathe into the space where you feel the wound. Exhale, let it go freely, and let it hang in the expanse of infinite emptiness, filled with absolute, not relative, bodhicitta. Continuous, uninterrupted compassion is the state of Buddha. It's our state. We just need to clean the lens, clean the mirror, polish it off, dust it off, understand, get some instructions. Do you have 2,000 years to meditate and figure it out? Why reinvent the wheel? It's dumb. Why would I waste my time? Why do you think we have institutions of learning? I think I'll sit down on a rock and invent the computer. Okay. Why do that when you can go to get a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and then build on the knowledge and move forward? Is my point, am I beating a dead horse? Sorry. So the point we have in our practice today is to be still and to allow ourselves to experience what we feel. If we need a break, we have a break. We can put 80% of our focus on it for 15 seconds. Another teaching we had is that, you keep your awareness of this like you're walking next to a friend and you're kind of aware that they're next to you, but you've also got your experience on your heart center. And you're working on this. And you're working on just not resisting experience. And if you want to, let's not put a label on anything, just how you feel when you exhale. Don't resist it. Okay? Inhale. Let it go. And it's fine, when right after a paycheck or while you're making love or at the end of a yoga class and you're in savasana or however, it's also excellent to practice then because we're not agitated, we're getting grounded, we're coming back to the ground of our being so that, when the shit hits the fan, we're prepared. It's the same concept as working 12 steps. You work the 12 steps so that when you need them, they're there. You get sober, you're like, hey, I'm feeling great. I don't need to do any work. You do need to do the work because you're going to, the beast is in the cage, but the door is unlocked. Right? But here, we unlock the cage and we walk in and we sit down with the beast and we say, hey, let's have lunch. And if we want to do the chud practice, we offer ourselves as lunch. But that's another conversation. We'll talk about that as we go. We've talked about it before. I want to wish everybody a multiracial, multinational, multi-gender, multi-identification, multi-political persuasion, multi-intelligence level, multi-spiritual capacity, universal, inclusive, compassion without limitations, never born, will never die, can't be touched, but can't be escaped, because it is our real nature, the supreme bodhicitta as it's taught. It's compassion without any interruption. And all we need to do is have an inhale, exhale, and relax. And just notice where we're resisting and let it go. Now, if you want to go into the very next level of this to really give yourself to someone else, imagine someone who's suffering, maybe not the absolute worst suffering, but someone who's suffering, and then absorb their suffering too. Give yourself wholeheartedly to this being. Give yourself all of your happiness and joy to this being. On the exhale, you're really doing it. This is not fake. You're really doing it. You really feel it. Inhale, take their suffering, all of it. Understand their mental suffering. Understand the acuteness of obscuration and fear and terror and panic that they may feel. Anything. Someone who's really been tortured. Someone who's really... And you can do this if you want. You can do this within yourself to the part of yourself. You can exchange the happiness you have now and you can take on the suffering because you're bigger now and you can handle it. And this is the same attitude. I know I'm working in and out of self and others here, but we can turn this attitude of not resisting suffering and exchanging self for others within parts of ourself, and we can work the same practice to others to really exchange our happiness for their suffering is the ultimate gift that you can possibly give because there's no attachment there. You're giving up your soul, body, speech, and mind. You're not resisting any suffering that comes from letting go of what you cling to. We're letting go of what we cling to. We're letting go of our attachment. We're giving wholeheartedly without reservation. There's no limitation. There's no resistance to the suffering and the fear of letting go. May any merits that we obtain from this practice be of benefit to all beings. Merry Christmas, everybody. Peace out and namaste.